Coming up this week, we're going to be talking with Adrian Chadd about all things wireless, his experience with FreeBSD on various laptop hardware, and a whole lot more. As usual, we're also going to have the latest news and answers to all your emails here on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 55, The Promised WLAN, recorded September 17th, 2014. Hi, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you guys with us on the show this week. We got another exciting show the week before me and Alan head out to Eastern Europe, out to Bulgaria for EuroBSDCon. So if you guys are going to be out there, we look forward to seeing you. Come on by and say hi. Indeed. I'm sure you'll see us milling around.
Yep.
But before we get to that, FreeBSD's got some news this week in our headlines. It looks like 10.1 is on track, and they've already come out with a beta 1.
Indeed.
So they are really pushing the envelope this one. I know I'm kind of frantic here, like, I got to get all these PCBSD features finished so we can do our 10.1 release as well. Yep. But yeah, they've got their 10.1 release underway, and we don't have a full changelog yet, but there are some cool new things in it that we can tell you about.
Yep, they started putting together the release notes, but they have... the new VT driver is enabled, so you can. It's not enabled. Well, it's a tunable kern.vty, but if you it can now boot UEFI, and if you boot from UEFI, the VT is the default.
Nice.
Cool. And then you can fail over to the other, or switch over to the other one. Or if you're booting from BIOS, it defaults to the old one, but you can switch to the new one.
Oh, that's pretty slick. Pretty slick. Yeah, I've been playing with it here, and yeah, looks like it works really well. I'll have to try it on an Intel system, see how it works with like the KMS switching and.
I haven't done the switching thing with X, but I booted my laptop with UEFI off. It was an 11 snapshot, but it's the same code, and loaded the i915 driver, and it seems to work quite well.
Nice.
Yeah. So one of the important things is now the USB sticks are going to be special combined. So it'll be one USB stick that can boot either UEFI or BIOS. Okay. So that should be cool. Although in beta 1 that wasn't quite working yet, but in beta 2, which should come out this Friday, that'll definitely be there.
Sweet. So in addition to some of the UEFI stuff, we also got multi-threaded soft updates for UFS. So that's pretty slick.
That'll make writing to disk a lot faster.
Yeah, and of course we have a link to the release schedule here. So let's see. You said beta 2 this Friday. And when are they anticipating release? I guess they're saying October 29th is when they expect to have releases out. So wow, about a month.
That should be just before MeetBSD.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Man, so I got a month. We got to get a lot of our stuff fixed too.
Yep.
Okay, well, cool deal.
And they got lots of other changes in here about fixing the Intel Turbo Boost feature, adding support for the new AMD family of temperature sensors for the CPU, so that you can do stuff like that. The Radeon KMS driver has been updated to include 32-bit support, allowing 32-bit applications to run on 64-bit systems and so on.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
The virtual memory system has been updated to implement FastPath for the page fault handler, which should make everything faster.
Let's see. They added a driver for an Apple Mac Mini 3, it looks like. The OCE driver has been updated to support some faster speeds. Looks like 20 gigabits second, 25 gigabits second link speeds. And anything else interesting in the notes here?
There's a couple of notes about the ATI graphics support and improvements.
Going down a little too. Beehive.
Well, yes. The biggest difference in 10.1 will be basically 9 months worth of Beehive bug fixes that'll be available in a release.
Looks like they added support for Microsoft Hyper-V to FreeBSD i36's loadable modules.
That was one of the other big ones in Beehive is you can actually boot a Beehive image that is ZFS now.
Nice.
So yeah, root on ZFS was added like 3 weeks after 10.0 came out. And so it wasn't quite there in time. Or it was, I think, maybe 3 weeks after the freeze or something. It might even been, it came out, the fix was available before the release, but it was too late to get it in. But anyway.
Sure.
So yeah, Beehive got a huge number of updates, and that'll be very nice to have that in a release.
Nice. I'm looking here. It looks like there's some ARM updates. They added a new kernel configuration for ARM support that supports WAN boards, among others. Chromebook. What else? Quartz, etc. Bootloader changes. So let's see here. We have our BSD menu stuff, and then of course you mentioned UEFI support.
Yes,
so
there's two images there.
Boot.
There's the boot1.efi, which is the file that would actually go on the EFI partition. And then there's an EFI FAT file, which is actually a little FAT12 like floppy disk sized partition image that you can just DD into a partition, and it'll make that ESP partition for you if you don't already have one, or if you don't feel like trying to make one yourself.
Yeah, walking through it by hand.
On my laptop, I actually used Refind, one of the it's kind of like a boot manager thing for EFI, and so it lets me pick between Windows and FreeBSD when I boot up my laptop, and boots both of them with UEFI.
Very cool. Let's see, going down, a whole bunch of new network drivers, of course, every release, new drivers, some more Rawlink, RT5370 and 5372 chips have been added.
Yeah, lots more stuff. The Gmer utility now has a resize command, making it easy to resize a mirror when all of its components have been replaced. So kind of like ZFS, you can actually grow a mirror after if you replace both the disks with bigger ones. Lots of new disk controller upgrade, like drivers and stuff for the newer LSI cards and so on. Lots of ZFS updates, including the bookmarks features and the minimum auto A shift, so that you can make sure that no pool is ever created with 512 byte.
Oh, that's fantastic.
No more.
That's one we needed for
you
a
don't
while.
need a GNOP hack anymore. You can actually just say,
"Yay,
make the pool at least this big."
So what was that in the ZFS command? I'm looking for.
It's a sysctl.
It's a sysctl.
Min auto A shift, and you set that.
Min auto A shift.
Yeah, you set that before you create the pool, and it won't let it make it a pool. Make a pool with smaller sectors than that.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, we've needed a workaround for that for a while. The GNOP thing was way too hackish. So let's see here. So file systems, ZFS got support to implement bookmarks.
Lots of other stuff.
Yeah, ton of user land changes. Let's see. New flags to cam control. Gosh, there's a lot here.
The new AutoFS thing was merged in, and also updates to the iSCSI daemon. I have to commit the updated man pages for that tomorrow.
Yeah, get on that. Way at you is. Come on, Alan. Let's see.
Well, no, I have to wait for the MFC timeout before I can merge them.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, a lot of miscellaneous other stuff. I'm looking through the notes
Lots
here.
of little things. The date utility now has a new flag, -R, which prints the date and time outputted in RFC 2822.
Very nice. Well, you know, while
everybody
we're going
needed
miniscule, the said utility now has the -U flag, which gives you unbuffered output. So there you go. But yeah, lots of cool new stuff in here.
PS -J can be used to filter the output to only matching jail IDs or jail names.
Oh, nice. Actually, that would be.
Or you can put -J0 to only show stuff that's not from a jail, which is actually quite handy. Because, you know, if you want to find all the, say Java processes running on the host system, but you don't want to disturb that one over there in the jail, that's definitely good stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely very cool.
And
Awesome.
Top can now use jail names as well, not just the ID numbers.
Yeah. This looks like it's going to be an exciting release. I'm looking forward to upgrading our systems to it as well.
Yep.
Okay, well, cool. Well, I think we'll have, of course, the link to the full notes.
Yes.
If you want to go through and
There's
look at all the
lots of
gory
stuff.
details after, there's plenty of
And
stuff we skipped over.
I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that hasn't made it into the notes yet as well.
Sure. Okay, well, cool. Next up in our headlines this week, we got a really cool article about doing a remote headless OpenBSD installation. So as you know, a lot of providers out there are only going to give you a limited number of operating systems that you can easily install in their boxes. sometimes you'll get lucky and they'll offer, say, FreeBSD, but it's harder to find one that's natively support the other BSDs as well. So this article shows you a really cool way you can use a Linux-based rescue system, a RAM disk, and QEMU to install OpenBSD on the bare metal of a server headlessly and remotely. But this is actually really clever.
Yes.
What we came up with here. This is really neat.
I remember Colin Purcell came up with something like this to solve the same problem a while back, but I don't think he maintains it anymore, so it wouldn't be very useful now. But
Sure.
it was called Depenguinator, and what you did is back, I guess this was probably even before LVM and stuff. So you'd write his little image in, so you'd unmount your swap and write his little image into that, and then modify grub to boot the FreeBSD out of that swap, and
Sure.
it would just come up with like SSH and nothing else. And then you could, you'd set up your root key or whatever, log in over SSH out of that little partition, and then you could erase the Linux and install FreeBSD in its place.
Nice. But I bet the provider's like, how in the world did he get that on here?
Yeah.
That is really cool though. But yeah, it's a very similar type setup where you run QEMU and installed one of the disks, and then let's see, how else did he do it here? He booted QEMU from the Linux rescue partition. It looks like installed it there, and then was able to go through and fire up OpenBSD pointed at the raw disks and do the installation of the raw disk.
Yes,
Pretty
I've
cool.
done a similar one. I had a machine that was a pair of disks of UFS mirrored, and I wanted to switch it over to ZFS, but I had no remote access. So I just took the second disk out of the Gmirror and reformatted it and set it up with ZFS and installed, and then rebooted, changed it so that the bootloader on the first disk would actually mount the root file system off the ZFS pool, and rebooted. And then once it was booting off the ZFS disk instead, I could wipe out the original disk and then add that to the ZFS pool, making it a mirror as well, and then update all the boot code again, and now it boots ZFS. Although it's very risky. You have to be careful to make sure you do everything in the right order and that it boots off the right disk and stuff, because when you have no access to the box, it's really complicated.
Yeah, it's a little iffy, but yeah,
I
that's why
remember,
there's cool guides like this out here,
yes.
though, so you can kind of, follow in someone else's footsteps who's already taken those arrows for you.
Yes, because I remember Dan was trying to do it, and he had to get help from his colo provider 2 or 3 times to finally get it going.
Well, cool. Okay, well, next up in the news here, we got another neat article this week about building a firewall appliance with pfSense. And this article, they're going to show you how to set up, of course, a gateway and wireless access point using a Netgate ALX 2C3 APU, which they have some nice pictures of that here on the website and how they got it set up. But
I remember they were
Okay.
demoing these, I think this exact ALX at EuroBSDCon last year, right? PC Engine?
Here's the components of it. It's a ALX APU 1C4 board. It's a 1 gigahertz dual core, 4 gigs of DDR3 memory, 2 PCI Expresses, mini PCI Expresses, excuse me, and 3 gigabit LAN ports, and of course a heat spreader. And it comes in a nice little box. And let's see, how did he build it here? He had a 30 gig SSD. It looks
I think
like
we talked about these. They gave 2 or 3 of them away at BSDCan with engraved BSD logos on them.
Oh, nice.
I think that they did one similar at NYC BSDCon as well. But the version of this they gave away at BSDCan had the BSD in either the Canadian Mountie hat, or dressed as a hockey player, or I think there was one other one. Dan won one of them. He's got it up on his Flickr and YouTube or
nice.
Twitter and stuff.
Oh, it looks like they just grabbed a pfSense image and popped it on a USB stick and was able to boot from it here. Let's see if there's anything special they had to do though. Let's see, for interfaces they came up as looks like RE0, RE1, pretty straightforward. Let's see though. One of the things they noted was he couldn't do 802.11n because of some limits within FreeBSD 8, which is what pfSense 2.1 was running on. But the new 2.2 will be on 9, so supposedly that will work now. That's good.
They're going to 9, not 10? I'm pretty sure they're going straight to 10.
Okay, well, it says 9 in the article here, but maybe
when we talked to Chris They were
gonna skip it.
They were going straight to 10 because 10 has all the multi-threaded awesomeness.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that's even better then. More current. Let's see. So that was pretty much all you had to do. I mean, it was pretty much a straightforward pfSense setup, after that point. But, well, let's see here. So what we got next up in the articles, we have some information about receive side scaling, or RSS for short, but not the other RSS you're thinking of.
So this one's when a server's receiving traffic, it normally only uses one CPU to process it all, and so this one is about spreading that out so that it can receive more traffic. And specifically, it comes into play when you have smaller CPUs, like a desktop kind of oriented i5, but you have a 10 gigabit Ethernet interface that's going to receive a lot of traffic.
Sure.
So Adrian walks through.
Adrian Chadd doing this.
Yes. So he walks through. He built a little tool based on libevent in this FreeBSD code to actually test it, and he walks through the hardware he has. He's got an i5 3550, which is 3.3 gigahertz with 4 gigs of RAM and a 10 gig NIC. And then he's got, goes through how he's configured the kernel and so on. And then his client box is an i5 4460, which is 3.2 gigahertz and 8 gigs of RAM. And he walks through and shows how, it was scaling how he expected, but then it wasn't when he got to using more separate processes. And he tried to figure out why, and he walks through how he figured out what the problem was, and then how he solved it so that it would scale up as he expected.
Let's see, does he mention, is this actually committed code, or is this something he's doing?
Some of this has been committed to head, and some of it's still being worked on.
Okay. So maybe this will be like an 11 thing then.
Oh, yes. It's a target to have this in 11.
Okay.
Although if it's ready, it might come to like 10.2 or something.
Which would be nice.
I don't know. I don't know how much
to see this happen.
I don't know how much it touches and whether it'll be possible to port it back to 10 or not.
Still,
but
really nice.
It's some very interesting work that will definitely be really nice as we see 10 and 40 gig interfaces coming to our servers, not requiring 24 cores to be able to actually saturate those speeds. By just making these software improvements, we can get the ability to saturate 10 and 40 gig ports on much smaller numbers of cores.
Yeah, that's really nice, especially if you don't need a ton of CPU for other things. You don't want to be spending it all just on processing NIC data.
Yes. One of the interesting things is that an i5, like he was using there at 3.3 gigahertz, might actually get more performance per core than a server that has 24 cores, because at that scale, you're only getting like 2.1 gigahertz.
Sure. That makes sense.
But he also talked about some interesting stuff where when he was... he originally built his app as like an echo server, so everything it received, it would then send back. And he found when he made it into a black hole where it would just receive and then not do anything, it actually made it slower. So he had to go investigate why. And he said
an odd quirk.
The lock contention on the socket receive buffer handling turns out that because there's so much receive traffic going on, the user land process receiving the data is being preempted by the NIC receiving threads very frequently. And then when this happened, there's a good chance it's going to be within the small window that the receive socket buffer lock is still being held by the application. Once this happens, the NIC receive thread processes frames until it gets to the point where it needs to grab one of those socket buffers that's locked. That fails, so then the NIC thread goes to sleep until the userland thread has finished consuming that packet. And then once it is, the NIC's going to wake up again and deprive the app. And then the CPU flips back to the NIC thread and continues processing. When the userland code is also transmitting the frames when it receives them, it increases the amount of time between the socket receiving and decreasing the probability of hitting that same lock contention. So actually making it do more work was making it faster, because it was making sure those two things didn't try to happen at the same time. So
interesting.
He says that note that that's contention.
It's just a single CPU.
Right, that's contention within the single CPU, not between the separate cores. So he's still working on it and hoping to get it even better. But I think he said at this point, the TCP for IPv4 and IPv6 is already fast enough to saturate the 10 gig, but that they still think they can make the UDP even faster.
Nice. Well, this is some great work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of Adrian, he's actually going to be coming up on the show next
Yep.
for our interview for this week. So you will have to stay tuned for that, of course. But before we do that, of course, we do want to mention one of the sponsors this week, which, of course, is TarSnap. And the website for that, tarsnap.com/BSD Now. If you're not doing backups, you need to.
Yes.
And if you're going to do them remotely, you should make sure they're encrypted or, backed up in such a way where nobody else has access to them, because nothing's worse than not only losing your data locally, but what about remotely having it exploited there? That's
Exactly.
not good.
So,
TarSnap makes it so that's not possible.
Yeah, it's reliable, trustworthy backups that you can get for a reasonable price, and it's all prepaid, so there's no unexpected bills.
Definitely. And really cheap to get started. Depending on the amount of data you use, you only pay for what you use. So again, take a look at it at tarsnap.com/BSD Now. They have clients for just about everything out there. So back up your BSD boxes, your Linux boxes, even a Windows box if you need to. So yes, you definitely want to take a look into this. Okay, cool. Anything else you want to mention, Alan?
No, I'm ready.
Okay. Well, we'll be back with our next segment in just a moment. We're joined now by Adrian Chadd of the FreeBSD project. Good to have you with us on the show this week, Adrian.
It's good to be here. Thanks.
Great. Okay. Well, we ask a lot of people the same question at the beginning. So give us your background, your history. How did you first get involved with BSD?
Blame Julian Elisher.
Oh, okay.
So dial back to the mid-90s when I was a 14-year-old computer nerd who was writing lots of C and Turbo Pascal and various bits of assembly, and he handed me a FreeBSD 1.1 CD, which didn't work because FreeBSD 1.1 didn't have support for those CD-ROMs attached to Sound Blaster cards. If anyone remembers those.
Oh man!
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
and so I ended up installing Slackware and using that until FreeBSD 2.1 came out, when it started supporting those crazy cut down CD-ROM drives that went into that required a Sound Blaster card, and I started using FreeBSD. So it was an installation problem, much like today. It was, even back then, it was an installation problem.
Sure.
And so I've been using FreeBSD there and at various internet providers I was working at, and just been using it ever since.
Okay.
So what's the story behind you becoming a FreeBSD committer?
Blame Jordan. So I was working at an ISP doing various bits of FreeBSD stuff, and there was talk about rewriting a sysinstall even back then. So this was like the late 90s, and I met up with him in Amsterdam, and we outlined what it would look like, and I never really did anything with it, but I ended up using that as a sort of a stepping stone to doing other bits in FreeBSD that seemed more tractable, because the trouble with the sysinstall rewrite is people wanted to rewrite it and make it better rather than just wanting to rewrite it. So,
Sure.
Yeah, that always complicates it, eh?
Yes, yeah. So I think it was like him and Julian and Paul Henning schemed to get me to become a committer.
Well, and you've never been able to leave since, man.
No, I haven't.
Well, for those that don't know, Adrian's the resident Wi-Fi expert, so that's what we're going to ask you about now. So what would you say is the overall state of wireless in BSD right now? What works? What doesn't? What vendors are being helpful? And who should we avoid?
The wireless works. I mean, it works about as well as you'd expect it to work with only a couple of developers, and so there are some places where it works quite well, which is AP mode and station mode, and there are places where it doesn't work very well, which is all the really weird corner cases that need a lot of attention and analysis. And there's only a couple of people working on the wireless stack at the moment, so the focus is very limited. So what works well here is I've been working mostly on the Atheros stuff, partly because I was working there for a bit, but partly because their stuff is all open and they have an NDA program, and you get access to all the data sheets, and you can basically get everything that you need to and make the chips do all kinds of cool things. And Kevin Lowe, I think, is working on, keep getting them mixed up, either Realtek or RA-Link, I forget which one, but they also release, or almost all of their driver source gets released somewhere. The documentation doesn't get released, but he at least gets he at least gets to like he's been slowly updating the FreeBSD driver to fix bugs that are in where the fixes are in the vendor code. But in terms of what doesn't work, mostly vendor support for other chips. Stuff since Sam Leffler departed the project hasn't been updated. So we don't have any updated Broadcom code. We don't have any updated Marvell code. So if you have devices that have Broadcom or Marvell chips in it, you're pretty short of luck.
Sure.
And most of the USB NICs that aren't Atheros chips are supported reasonably well. I have no interest in writing USB driver code. I try, but it hasn't exceeded my threshold of fun yet, right?
Sure.
and so I keep looking at it and going, once I get the USB bits done, the rest of it's easy. But I keep having more interesting things to work on in my spare time. So the real hole there is all those widely available Atheros wireless NICs.
Okay. So are some of those vendors being a little less than helpful, like the Broadcoms, or
yes?
do we need a wall of shame?
Well, I mean, it's pretty industry standard. The Marvell are okay with documentation if you sign an NDA. Broadcom, we've hit a stone wall, and it mostly boils down to they're not being really public vendors that are publicly out there saying, we want to put FreeBSD and Wi-Fi in our shipping product. What do we do? And there are vendors that are doing exactly that, but they don't talk about it. It's sort of BSD and Wi-Fi is everywhere, but you don't know because the vendors don't make as much noise as the companies making them don't make as much noise as they do about Linux.
Sure.
So stick with Atheros, stick with Realtek and RA-Link. If you want to see updated Broadcom or Marvell support so you can use all of those funny MacBook Pro laptops or MacBook Air laptops, then there needs to be much more concerted effort to try and port the updated drivers over. Oh, and I completely forgot Intel. So the Intel driver is actually in better shape now, and Intel do have all the driver sources all open, and the Intel as a company is a lot nicer to work with than Broadcom or Marvell, and so I've had great success talking to their driver developers, getting help with the IWN driver and all of the crazy crap that goes on behind the scenes there. So that's been quite nice.
Okay, cool.
So yes, generally speaking, how much of the wireless code can be shared or easily ported between the different BSDs, like FreeBSD and OpenBSD and so on?
So what happened early on in like the shared stack thing, the shared Net802.11 stack thing, was OpenBSD and NetBSD went off in slightly different directions, and NetBSD went off in their own crazy way of doing virtual access points, and OpenBSD went and took a more security-focused thing, and they stripped out a lot of the crypto from Net802.11 and used their own userland crypto library stuff. And I haven't looked into either of those in too much detail because I do need to sleep at some point. But
Sure.
by and large, the driver interface layer is mostly the same still, and so there has been quite a bit of code shared between OpenBSD, NetBSD, FreeBSD. Dragonfly BSD just picked up our stack again. They just did an update recently. So they've actually got a reasonably updated version of our stack and an updated version of they just updated to the latest Intel and Atheros driver code because our code was more stable than theirs. So there's a lot of sharing going on behind the scenes. I mean, I would like there to just be one stack. Ideally, there'd be one Net802.11 stack and one set of drivers, but that requires a little more project cooperation than
Sure.
Yeah. But no, we haven't diverged all that much, which is nice.
So specifically, there's not too much duplication of work, right?
No, I mean, there has been a little bit with the Atheros driver because the OpenBSD guys went and they were one of the early efforts to get an open version of the Atheros hardware abstraction layer. So they actually have their own driver. And I've told them I've asked them if they'd be interested in just porting our driver over. So there is a bit of duplication of effort as they try to fix up their ported Atheros code from other sources instead of just using mine. Maybe one day they will. I don't know.
Okay. So what were some of the changes needed to get Kismet and aircrack-ng working with the FreeBSD wireless stack?
So specifically, Sam went and disabled the monitor mode injection code a few years ago because there were regulatory domain concerns, and which are completely valid. I mean, there are channels you're allowed to listen on, but you're not allowed to transmit on. And what didn't come after that was a easily used, well documented way of doing injection after that. And so when I was at DEF CON, I looked into this and I'm like, this is crap. Like, I'm sure there's a way to do it, but it's not obvious. And the other BSDs didn't do it. They still supported monitor mode injection. So I restored what the old functionality was, which is a little shady, and I don't necessarily think it's the right thing to do in the long run. But there's now pressure on me to come up with a way of implementing the regulatory enforcement so that you can do things like scan all the channels, but you can't transmit on channels that you're not allowed to in your current regulatory domain. And that was basically it. Once I restored monitor mode injection support, raw frame support injection, everything just worked again.
Okay.
And so the Kismet worked out of the box, and aircrack. We needed to remove code from aircrack because the upstream vendor code worked 100%, no changes. So the port needs to be fixed, not the vendor code.
Okay.
So
that, yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. So after DEF CON, that was all done, and both aircrack and Kismet work pretty well now.
Cool. Are there any other wireless snooping tools that still need some work to work on FreeBSD?
I haven't come across any yet, mainly because the BSD injection API has been around for like 10 years, and a lot of them have 10-year-old code that just works. Right. So nobody's told me any that don't work that still support BSD. If somebody knows of some more driving or like Wi-Fi security tools that don't work under FreeBSD head right now, then like drop me a line and we'll have a look.
Cool.
Okay, that'll be helpful. So cool. Well, how's your experience been running BSD on laptops so far?
Terrifying. And it's mostly there was a in the early 2000s, it was about the same as running Linux. You'd get lucky and you'd find a laptop where ACPI wasn't too buggy. And over the last few years, now that I'm much more active in BSD development again, I started running FreeBSD on whatever I could try and get my hands on. And there are some issues with buggy ACPI implementations that need workarounds. Drivers need, like the Theros driver needed working around. There was for a few years the lack of updated DRI code made it really hard to do anything with Intel. Well, with graphics that was even reasonably recent, and so for a few years there was a period of everything being terrifying, and people clung to their old laptops that worked and just wouldn't let it go. It's now less terrifying. I mean, there's a resurgence in people doing development with Lenovo ThinkPads, which are getting increasingly good support. They're working around the ACPI bugs, looking at Linux to see all the crazy crap they've done with ACPI workarounds. Vendors now that Windows 8 is out, it changed. Windows 8 has some different requirements for video stuff. So here's a fun one. In Windows 8, the screen fades they have when you're using it, you'll see like when it fades out to suspend or to like turn on the screensaver, the screen gradually fades out, and that's actually implemented as a requirement for the video BIOS ACPI people to actually have fine-grained background video brightness controls. So they don't implement it by like color palette shifting. They fade out the backlight, right? And so now you've got this crazy like 80 level backlight control in ACPI, whereas before you'd had 8.
Sure.
So I found on some of the more recent laptops that have like Windows 8 ready, you sit there and you hit the brightness down button, and you have to hit it like 200 times to get the brightness to go down because they're assuming you're running Windows 8. And so when ACPI queries, it says there are 200 brightness levels. And so there are crazy things like that. But the ThinkPads I've been using, a couple of other non-Lenovo things, for the most part, FreeBSD head just works. The Intel stuff works. The graphics works. There's active development in fixing the ACPI bugs. There's Haswell DRI support that's been slowly, and the DRI2 update that's slowly being massaged into shape. And so I'm actually quite confident that over the next year or two, we'll see a continuing increase in our ability to run on all the current hardware and have everything for the most part
Just
on
work.
par with Linux. Yeah. Yes. So when people say FreeBSD doesn't work on laptops, it's like, well, go buy a goddamn ThinkPad and everything should just be fine.
That's what I did. Mine works pretty well.
Yeah.
Same here.
Yeah. So there used to be a project that tracked all of the laptops that things worked or didn't work on, and the hosting for that somehow stopped working. And so we've been a group of us have been trying to put together a list of modern hardware that we know works with FreeBSD 10 and FreeBSD Head. And so there's a little corner in the wiki under laptops where we're trying to list all the laptops that we currently have and what we know works and what doesn't. And so if you go to the wiki page and you search for laptops, there's like 6 laptops so far that the developers have and we know everything works, and we dump that in there. And that list is just, as people send me more hardware to try and get FreeBSD wireless running on, that list is just going to continue increasing.
Yeah, I guess the biggest problem with that one is the fact that, the model numbers for laptops don't always mean as much as they're supposed to, Yeah,
and you end up with like the manufacturers willy-nilly shipping, changing hardware underneath you, or the BIOSes are different, and so you end up with like some guy with a Lenovo with a different BIOS that has a completely different set of ACPI bugs, and it's just it's crappy. But like it's always been like this.
Right.
This isn't anything new. It's just now, I guess we all got spoiled by running MacBooks, and people are getting a little fed up with it now. And so there's this move back towards having a FreeBSD environment that's kind of pretty, and that's what we have.
Sure. Yeah.
Cool. So are there any specific areas that you think that we should focus on to get better laptop experience?
I think I like PCBSD, and I'd like to see more focus with people using PCBSD on laptops and fixing up whatever crazy corner issues are there. Because really, FreeBSD I run FreeBSD Head on my laptops rather than PCBSD because I run Head. And what I need as a wireless developer and as a other like laptopy person is some interest from people to help MFC patches back from Head to FreeBSD 10. Because I have a high threshold for my own code looking and being good and being reasonably tested, and so I don't MFC things because I don't run 10 anywhere. Anywhere that I use as a laptop, right? We use 10 at work, but we don't do anything with laptops. So someone's just popped up and said, "I've done all the network the wireless and Intel backporting, and it works. Can you MFC it?" That's what I need. I need some help like that, where people are going to volunteer backporting fixes and generally running PCBSD and FreeBSD on laptops and providing that kind of feedback. And I mean, putting Chris on the hook here, like having PCBSD for 11 would be really nice, because I think we need to encourage more developers to be running FreeBSD, and PCBSD just makes that really easy, but it's not running on Head. And I know how much of a big effort that is, which is why I just run Head. But at some point, that's the kind of thing that makes it easier.
We started doing a stable image, 10 stable, so we do have that, and we're rolling the packages for it. And Head would be the next logical step. The big thing for me is, of course, updating. Like, how often do we update, and when do you get a new kernel and world, and then when we do that, do you get new packages as well?
Yeah, I mean, what I do when I do development now is like every 2 weeks, I have a couple of laptops, and I'll upgrade one of them. And when I do the upgrade, sometimes you get crazy crap, like you upgrade and all parent PIDs are 1, as we just discovered. Yeah, and so but with Head, the way that they do package builds is they actually do rebuild all the packages every Wednesday against an updated Head. So the right thing to do is to upgrade Head on your laptop and then force reinstall all the packages.
Every package, yep.
Which is a pain, but it's Head. It's like
that's what you expect. Yeah.
That's what you expect right now. And maybe in the future, when we have better dependency tracking with libraries and we actually version things better, that won't be the case. But at the moment, that's the case. But I think what we really need is just more developers feeling comfortable trying FreeBSD Head out on something that mostly works and reporting issues, and not just going, USB suspend doesn't work, so I'm going to unload USB, right? Like that's the current bug I'm looking into, is why does USB suspend not work on an Asus Ultrabook rather than Lenovo's, where everything does work. The other thing that's interesting is looking at more of a focus on power management and power consumption. I mean, Linux has things like PowerTop, and they've got a lot of developers that are focused on fine-grained power usage. And FreeBSD's got some of that, but there hasn't been that much of a focus. And on like the Sandy Bridge and Ivory Bridge laptop hardware, we do get a few hours, but we could get on a battery, but we could get more with more of a focus on power consumption, and that is a dramatically different ball pit than server performance, because when you're doing laptop performance, you want to do things like dynamic clock management to a point, but you want to like not engage other cores unless one core is busy, because it turns out that the longer you can keep cores asleep, the much more efficient
you actually have to
power usage
get into having the scheduler understand that don't wake that core up unless we really need to.
And the Linux scheduling power management stuff has those twiddles now, where you set, my scheduler should be don't use cores unless we have to, versus just schedule stuff where it's efficient. But we also have to investigate things like Wi-Fi power saving, which I've been doing, and how do we fixing all the bugs for switching off things like USB ports if there's nothing plugged into them, or devices if we're not using them, underclocking the GPU, making sure that the GPU dynamic clock scaling crap and the DRI2 code works, so that when you're not doing 3D, the GPU clock doesn't get cranked up to 11. Like those kinds of things.
And I guess one of the other ones is my Lenovo has the Optimus, where it has the 2 video cards, and you can use the BIOS to hide one, but the power utilization suggests that both cards are powered up, and one of them can actually be switched off.
It doesn't turn off the card. It just simply hides it, and we can turn off PCI devices, but like I don't have an Optimus laptop, and so I can't sit down and guess. Right? It's the sort of thing where we need more developers who are willing to sit down and go, right, how do I switch on and off the Optimus stuff? How do I do the pass through? And I've looked at the Optimus code, and it's dirty, but it works. Right? They actually speak directly over the PCI device to turn on and off bits of crap, and then run 2 X servers and configure them to somehow display on the same. It's dirty as hell, but like the Linux code, there's code there for Linux that works, and someone just needs to have an Optimus laptop and be willing to dredge through the crap that is stuff that goes on under the hood with laptops, right? So yeah, I mean, people just need to buy, developers and people who are interested in this need to just grab their laptop and open it up and ask some questions. How do I make this better? Like, what can I do? What bugs are there? What's drawing all the power? And then talk to us about it.
Well, speaking of that, so how about regular users, say non-developers? Is there any way they can help out? Would donating hardware to developers be helpful?
So there are cases where that is helpful. So Matt Dillon from the Dragonfly project, he just donated a laptop to me to help fix one of the Atheros chipsets that I couldn't get my hands on. And so I ended up having to get an entire laptop to get access to one chip versus buying the card itself, because it's a custom Asus card. But I mean, most of the time, the problem is the developer time, and there are some cases where donating a laptop to a developer fills in a gap that they have. For example, that, or the guys doing the coders doing the DRI update. They didn't necessarily have all the laptop hardware they need, and so donating them an Intel and a Radeon and an AMD laptop is the thing to do, because they just don't have the hardware. But the other thing is that most of us do this in our spare time, and so what we actually need is either help from other developers, or we need to make it easier for users to report back stuff. And so a general thing is like, how do we build scripts that let us developers get more useful information from users, so that the debugging process is easier, right? And the other thing is that, if you have a particular device that doesn't work, like, we all started not knowing what the hell we were doing. Right? And so if you're a user and you're missing like device support for something, don't be afraid to say, how do I do this? I mean, you might find that there's someone out there that can help you on the list. You might find that you can attack this as a problem, especially if it's like something silly like ACPI. Like, there's a lot of debugging that we can do with you, and it might be a 2-line change that we can help figure out. And that's happened in the last 6 months. That's the sort of thing that has made laptops better as some users are actually becoming developers. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that it's not always something you can throw hardware at.
Right.
Sometimes we need sleep.
Yeah.
And so if you're a user and you're at a company that assigns laptops and you're doing FreeBSD development, like ask, hey, look, can you guys, I'm using FreeBSD, can you please help me put FreeBSD on this? Like, even if they say no, like be vocal and say, I would like FreeBSD on my environment, because no one's gonna help out if no one's going to think that FreeBSD is even viable in your company if nobody requests it to begin with. And the Linux people faced the same thing a decade ago, right? It used to be that you couldn't get Linux on a laptop at work because it wasn't supported. So we need users to actually be vocal and saying, I'm using FreeBSD, or I'd like to be using FreeBSD, and make sure that they tell people and their employers and the internet at large, like, hey, guys, like, I'm running FreeBSD on my stuff. It actually works. Make a big deal out of it. That's what we need to see.
Cool.
Great. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I think I've done enough talking. I mean, it's been good. It's been good seeing much more interest in the last few years with people using FreeBSD wireless, FreeBSD laptops, mobile stuff, and trying to use it as your day-to-day work environment. And there's been this stigma that you can't use FreeBSD to do work with, which is dumb because it actually does work.
Sure.
And guys, this is an open source project. I mean, part of it is funded by companies that contribute their work back, but a lot of the stuff that isn't commercially interesting, like laptops, like this is something that we need volunteers to help out with. And so I encourage anyone who has FreeBSD running on their stuff or wants to like jump in and say hi. And even if BSD in general, if you're wanting to use it at work, or you're wanting to using it at home and you have it working, or you need help, say something. Make a big deal about it online. Take it out and show people. I've had people. I've been to Linux conferences where they're like, FreeBSD runs on laptops. When did that happen? You know, that's the kind of thing that
was there, right?
Right. And so I think I think the BSD community in general could do with being noticed some more.
So be a little more vocal about it.
Yeah. So like, be vocal when it doesn't work, but you know what? Be vocal when it does work, because you know we like to blow our own horns, and know that we're actually doing a good job here and there. And the rest of the Unix community at large could do with seeing that there are other alternatives.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the show with us this week, Adrian. We appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me. Have a great day.
You too.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll be back with our next segment in just a moment. And we're back with our next segment. But before we get into the weekly news roundup, of course, we want to mention their sponsor this week, which is IX Systems. And we'll have a link you guys can watch. I guess they have a promo for Meet BSD, which is coming up beginning of November, first day of November. So here pretty soon, a little more than a month. But if you can make it out to that in the Bay Area, definitely you'll want to do so. But speaking of IX Systems, so that was the link they sent us this week, or that we found. So anything else interesting you want to mention about them, Al? Have you ordered any new servers recently?
Well, I'm in the quoting process of another one. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And you know, I was like, all right, I'd like to do this, but I'm not sure that it's possible. And they're like, yeah, they can't quite do that. It'll cause this problem and that problem. I'm like, oh, okay. So worked out what I was after and got a quote. And I was like, well, how much would it cost to upgrade all that to the new Intel Xeon processors, the V3s instead of the V2s? And they're like, oh, well, that'll be about $600 more. And most of that's due to the DDR4 RAM being more expensive, and you're ordering a lot of RAM.
Sure. How much memory you get on
that
this one?
one's, I think, was 256 gigs or something. Lots of RAM.
Nice.
But
yes.
So that $600 more was not much in the price of the whole machine. It was like, well, it'd be silly to get the old version for that price difference.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's pretty cool. And of course, IX Systems, will kind of, it's kind of white glove beginning to end, including the consulting process where they're helping you figure out exactly what you want or what you'll need for your particular circumstances.
Yes, they're after solving your problem, not selling you the biggest hardware they can.
Definitely. And of course, IX builds everything from the FreeNAS minis all the way up to the monster 80 core systems we've shown off in the past.
Or
And
the
one of those, a 24 10 gig
yeah,
Enix
or
on
the
it.
one I bought with the 20 or 36 4 terabyte hard drives.
Nice.
However you want to do it.
Definitely. So that URL is ixsystems.com/BSD now, and you want to let them know we sent you and get in touch with those guys there. These guys know BSD, they know open source, and they can make sure that you get something that'll fit exactly what you need. And whatever problem you're trying to solve or however your workflow works, they can come up with a solution that'll best fit that circumstance.
Yep, and if you're going to be anywhere near California for November 1st and 2nd, you should definitely come out to Meet BSD. Go to meetbsd.com and register and find information about getting there. And they have a reservation block at the hotel and all the easy stuff. So
nice. Okay. Well, let's see. Let's get into the news roundup here, Alan. So first up, we have some internet rejoicing news that SendMail has been removed from OpenBSD. Yay! Yes. So yes, mail server admins around the world are rejoicing indeed because SendMail is finally gone from OpenBSD, which of course they've had OpenSMTPD being part of the base system. So why do you need SendMail anymore? It's kind of redundant at this point and unneeded. So, and for anybody who's not initiated to the pain that was SendMail.cf, go ahead and take a look at that. Compare it to SMTPD.com.
Well, yeah, especially when you're comparing that to OpenSMTPD, you're just like, who thought that up?
Yeah. There was a reason there were whole books written just on the SendMail.
Yeah. Tomes.
Oh man, but I'm glad to see that happen. So I guess it looks like OpenBSD 5.6 will serve as the transitional release, including both SendMail and OpenSMTPD. But 5.7 will be the first release without it. So rock on, guys! That's awesome. And of course, if you still need it for some reason, it will live in the ports. So it's not like it's completely inaccessible. It's still available if you want it, but it's not being shoved down your throat. So hopefully, we'll put this out. FreeBSD will maybe follow suit sometime in the future, possibly including Dragonfly's mail transfer agent in the base.
Baptiste, the guy responsible for most of the package system, was actually was working on that for a while. I think it's mostly finished. It was just dealing with some FreeBSD specific things, and hopefully that'll be an option for 11 instead of SendMail. The big difference there is that would be a mail transfer agent rather than a mail server. So by default, usually all you need is enough to send email off to some other email server. You don't actually need a whole email server as part of the base system. If you need an email server, SendMail, Postfix, XIM, OpenSMTPD, everybody else is important. And I agree with that. Just having a simple mail transfer agent so that you can send email out of the box makes a lot more sense, I think.
Definitely. And of course, TJ has a note here too. If any viewers out there are using OpenSMTPD with spam filtering, IMAP, DKIM, all that, we would love for you to write us, maybe help write a mail server tutorial for us and send it in, because that's something I think people would find fascinating to see how you did that. And we can all reminisce on how difficult it was to do the same thing back with SendMail. Very cool. Okay, well, next up, we have some pfSense backup news, Alan. So
so this is a script, pfmb, which connects to one or more remote pfSense installs and backups the configuration XML file. The resulting backup will enable you to roll back to a previous configuration or replace failed hardware. pfmb will also keep track of a number of backups you specify in the config and rotate out the old ones. So it can, take a snapshot once a day and keep the last 2 weeks worth or whatever, so that if your pfSense hardware ever dies or whatever, and you replace it with a new one, you still have your config laying around.
You don't have to try to remember what that weird rule was you put in 3 years ago.
And you could also
that one edge case.
And you can also use it to pull down the configs onto your main laptop or desktop or whatever, where you can then use Tarsnap to back them up.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, you'll want to check that out. We'll have the link. It looks like it's in GitHub, where you can grab that. And there's some nice instructions here on the page on how to get it set up and running and everything. So take a look at that. Next up, though, some exciting news about books.
Yes.
So the design and implementation of the FreeBSD operating system. I guess we had mentioned before that pre-orders were up, but now it looks like it's shipping out.
Yes.
And you said yours is on the truck.
Yes, mine's on the truck right now
heading to your house. Fantastic. So, of course, if you're interested in FreeBSD development or learning about the operating system internal, this is going to be a great book to buy.
Yes.
We've even had all 3 authors on the show before, and we have links to all the previous episodes so you can see the guys, the brains behind this tome.
It's actually the #1 best-selling book in the computer operating systems theory category.
Nice.
I don't,
Is that on Amazon?
I don't imagine there's very many books in that category, but this is definitely...
But still,
yes. So while it says it's the 2nd edition, because it's second, there was a previous one that was just about the BSD operating system from before FreeBSD came out or was a project. So this book's been being updated and coming out for quite a while, and it has a huge number of sections. There's a whole section on Capsicum. There's a whole section on ZFS in here, which I've thumbed through a draft of it. It looks really good. There's nice diagrams, everything. But no matter which part of the system you're interested in, even if you're not into, writing an operating system or whatever, just understanding some of the theory behind certain elements of it, like how the network stack works or how the ZFS works, can help as an administrator. So even though I'm not a C programmer at all, I still bought a copy because reading through how ZFS actually works will just make it easier for me to operate it better, or understanding the network stack that much more will make me understand where to look when something is slower than I think it should be or whatever.
Definitely. It'll help all your use cases. Like, oh, I remember it did it this way, so I'm sure this path I'm going to take will be better or faster or whatever. So, yeah, definitely. We encourage you guys to get that. I need to get the newer one. I have the previous edition. But,
I pre-ordered mine so long ago.
I
almost forgot about it.
Right.
And then
I'll pick it up. A lot of times, sometimes I see these at trade shows too, when we go, and they'll have them there. So I'll try and get one there and get the authors maybe to autograph it.
Yes, I'm planning to take mine to Euro and meet BSD, and between the two, I think I should get everybody. So cool. Chapters is like the history and goals of the project, the design overview, which covers kernel facilities, how it's organized, process management, security, memory management, etc. Kernel services, processes, security, memory management. I said all that already. The I/O subsystem, devices, device drivers, how the Geom layer works, virtualization with VirtIO, Zen, device pass-through, stuff like that. The fast file system and UFS.
Yep.
And how all the software
CFS,
and then ZFS there is a huge chunk of it. And then
what's it mentioned on firewalls? Does it go through IPFW and IPF as well?
The network file system, so it covers NFS, interprocess communications, network protocol, IPv4 and 6, all that fun stuff, TCP, system startup and shutdown. Anyway, it comes out at like 900 and something pages, and they used a thinner paper this year because the book was so much thicker they didn't want it to not fit in your bookshelf.
Oh, so, there you go. It's heavy too.
It's quite heavy.
Well, cool. Well, okay. So again, order your copy of that if you're even interested at all in the internals on how this kind of stuff works, and maybe even not on BSD. It's still cool to read and see how this works, especially in the theory category. So, okay, well, next up, we have some OpenBSD news. Of course, we mentioned last week about OpenBSD creating systemd wrappers and how that was getting some mainstream attention. So one of the developers wrote into Undeadly detailing what's going on, what the overall status is. He also cleared up any confusion about porting systemd to BSD. He said that's not going to happen, or his code ever ending up in base. He says it won't. Oh, so there you go.
Yeah, and so specifically, this is about importing shim-like replacements for 4 of the dbus daemons that systemd provides, namely hostnamed, localed, timedated, and loginD. And specifically, this is just a shim in order to get GNOME to work. And so, it's not about porting all of systemd or anything, and it wouldn't go in the base system. It would just be an extra dependency of GNOME when you install GNOME, so that GNOME will be happy living on BSD.
Correct. They won't have to rewrite all the internals in GNOME to fix that.
So it definitely doesn't replace init, boot, RC, or anything like that. It's just dealing with, time zones, key maps, locales, all the little bits that of systemd that
I
we can
wonder
get
if
away.
we would need something like that in our Linux emulation layer at some point.
Yeah, I don't know about if it would go in the Linux emulation layer, or again, if it would just be, a GNOME dependency.
Like a package or something. Yeah. Interesting. Oh, very cool.
We're hoping to have an
Okay.
interview with one of the people on that project as well.
Yes, and we will let you know as soon as we have that scheduled. Okay, well, we'll be back to our next segment in just a moment. Okay, we're back with our feedback and questions segment. So first up this week is Brad, who writes in asking about firewalls. He says, first of all, congratulations on your first birthday. I hope you guys go as long as BSD Talk. That's going to be a long time. We'll see if we can do that. He says he's also been listening since the beginning. He wants to thank you for the show. He said it was his final impetus to take the BSD plunge. Well, that and Debian adopting systemd, that pretty much did it. He said, so I stood up my first PCBSD box, and now I'm getting more comfortable with it. Well, very cool. He says he has a question, though, about firewalls and BSD. He said his current setup is that he has an HP ProLiant DL360G3 machine as his firewall. It has 3 Ethernet interfaces, one for the internal network, one for the external cable modem, and the third is a DMZ. On the DMZ, I have my wireless access point, which routes to the internet except for VPN traffic, which is the only way to get to the internal network. He said, so the firewall runs a bare bones Debian stable installation with IP tables. He says he uses an application called Firewall Builder on his workstation, which has a Firewall 1 style GUI. He says, I generate the rules in the GUI, hit compile, it spits out a set of IP table rules, optionally directly into the firewall itself. He said he's been many years considering switching over to a PF-based solution. He's been using FW Builder for many years, and his rules work pretty well. FW Builder will generate rule sets for Cisco, FSWM, and iOS ACLs, as well IP filter, IPFW, IP tables, and of course PF. He says, I have considered pfSense, but something inside me creeps me out about having a GUI or a web UI on a firewall. So he says, I have considered setting up FreeBSD or OpenBSD box with PF using my existing rules to generate a PF script to use on the firewall. So he says, can you tell me the pros and cons of this approach, why it might be better or worse than using pfSense?
Well, in particular, using a wizard to, well, this sounds silly, but using a wizard to generate the rules means you don't actually necessarily understand what the rules are doing as well. So it makes it harder to edit them and stuff if you're doing it manually, whereas pfSense kind of does that for you because pfSense is a wizard that generates the rules. So,
that's right.
Well, I can kind of see his point both ways. I just don't know if I've never used this firewall builder thing he's talked about. I don't know anything about it.
It's just a really nice graphical app that you set up rules and then it spits them out in various formats.
Right. I guess the question with Firewall Builder is how does it understand your 3 different interfaces compared to how pfSense does? Well, especially when pfSense, when you assign them the different roles, it changes how they show up in the GUI.
pfSense would definitely be better integrated with PF, whereas FW Builder is going to be a lot more assumptions.
And it also depends what else he wants to do. Some of the other advantages to pfSense are it has a packages system where you can say, oh, I want a squid proxy, or I want, I don't know, they have a bunch of other plugins and stuff you can get that add extra features. Plus it has support for the traffic shaping and lots of other stuff.
Yeah, any of those extra features that happen outside of PF as well, pfSense would have support for. So if FW Builder is not going to go, oh, I need to set gateway enable in rc.conf and I need to do this and that. Right. pfSense is going to do all that for you.
But it's perfectly reasonable to just do PF yourself with FreeBSD or OpenBSD. That's one of the questions, I guess. If it says if Firewall Builder supports PF, which PF is it? Because the syntax for rules is different between FreeBSD and OpenBSD now.
That's a good question.
And so if it's only going to generate rules that are compatible with one or the other, although I think the differences are fairly small and can be worked around, but that's the point there. My main reason I would say to use something other than pfSense is if you want to do something else with that particular firewall machine, right? The reason why my firewall doesn't use pfSense is that I also run some other stuff on that machine, right? It's like, hey, it's got 8 gigs of RAM. It doesn't need it all for the router. I could also run some VMs on here or whatever. Whereas previous to that, I had a machine dedicated to just being the firewall, and so I used pfSense. So the advantage to doing something else is that you could use get more use out of the machine. But if you don't need to, then pfSense is pretty nice. It also depends if, is there ever anyone else on your network that needs to be able to change firewall rules or stuff? pfSense is much easier.
It looks like I'm looking at FW Builder, by the way. It does let you select if this is OpenBSD style PF or FreeBSD style PF.
Cool.
So that is cool, at least. So you have the option.
Yep.
But I don't know. I mean, so I had used Firewall Builder years and years ago. I'm sure it's improved since then. But at that point when I used it, it was just neat to be able to graphically design something and then look at the rules it generated and use that as like a template or a framework. They go, okay, this is the things I didn't think about. If I had written this from hand, I would have been reading through docs trying to figure out how to do this particular bit. And it just showed me an example. So it can be helpful for that as well. If that's your thing.
It seems that it actually supports PF and IPFW properly. So you could try it if you want. I don't think the web GUI is kind of the entire point of pfSense. So I'm not sure. It's the same thing you would get if you have a Cisco ASA.
Sure.
And you can still just SSH into the pfSense if you want, although you can't really change the rules that way.
Sure. I hope we answered your question there, Brad, and good luck with that. Sounds like it'll be a fun project either way. Okay, next up we have Ben. I'll read this one here for you, Alan. So he says, hey guys, I recently started getting involved in FreeBSD ports, and I'm finding it a bit of a pain to manually install dependencies in a jail and then compile my test port. He says, introduce Poudre, which can create the jail and installs dependencies and does the compile and logging for you. He said the only issue is that he's doing this on his FreeNAS Mini from IX systems. Since Poudre is not installed in the base system and cannot be, I was wondering if Poudre itself can be installed in a jail, and if so, can it still create individual sub-jails for each build that it attempts? And also, do sub-jails even exist?
Yes, so jails are hierarchical. So inside a jail, the jail doesn't know it's a jail, and so you can create jails within jails within jails. And so, yes.
Jails all the way down.
So originally, there were some things that prevented you from running Poudre in a jail. Most of those have been addressed now. I think all of them, in fact. I'm pretty sure they run Poudre in a jail when they're actually building it on the cluster now.
Sure.
There are a couple of extra things you have to do, and they might be slightly trickier to do on a FreeNAS Mini, but you should be able to do them. You have to load a couple of extra file systems, I think. Fdesk, FS or something, and one other one.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of
things you had to load in the jail.
Don't know where the instructions are, but when we specifically asked Brian Drury about this a couple of weeks ago, and he said that yes, you can. So yes, you can. And if you figure it all out, it'd be really nice to have that as a FreeNAS Mini plugin, because I bet there's a couple other developers who could benefit from the same thing.
Definitely. I'm just looking at the docs. I don't see it that it's been updated with any jail information specifically.
Yeah, I started a tutorial on it, but I might have to go back to that and see if I can't figure that out. Because although when I asked Brian about it, my main goal was I want to use Poudre and I want to put it in a jail so it doesn't mess up my host system's jail ID numbers. Because I was up to like jail number 12,700 something from all the Poudre runs I had been doing with my 24 cores. But they've changed that now so that it doesn't cause that number to go off the top. It'll reuse the old jail IDs instead of incrementing them. So I never looked into it any further after that. But I do know that it is possible now. So you might be best asking whoever's listed as the maintainer for the Poudre report, which I think is Brian Drury. And if it's not already out there somewhere, we will nag him and then we'll have a blog post or something somewhere that explains how to do it.
Cool. Okay, you want to read the next one here from Matthew?
Matthew writes in about OpenVPN. He says, congratulations on your first year. The three of us at BSD Now and Will Bachman with BSD Talk are definitely major reasons why he decided to come to EuroBSD Con this year, which is great.
Cool.
And he says he has to say that the OpenVPN tutorial has already served as a good anchor to allow him to access his Linux box and provide some privacy from remote locations he has to work from, which have rather crappy proxies and things that mess up the connection. He says, your tutorial covers building a VPN that allows connections to a remote site, and briefly mentions that it would require to get a full VPN such that you can pass all traffic through the VPN by using this set the default gateway to bypass DHCP. He says he tried keeping things as small and simple as possible, and so he came up with a couple of little changes for the tutorial. But he says he soon realized that he was going to need some NAT, and when he enabled PF and wanted to make a simple rule set that allow him to NAT the traffic coming from the OpenVPN interface, but he says he still wouldn't get any traffic coming back. So he says, currently I've been following the minimalist pf.com based on a search of the net and looking, and he listed, okay. So the problem he seems to be having is that he's trying to NAT traffic from the OpenVPN out to into his regular connection, and he's not getting the replies back. And looking at what, he does. All right, he does say he has gateway enabled, so that should be passing it. Yes, he's missing the second. No, he's not. Just looking at these rules here, I think he's missing the rule that deals with when traffic comes in and it's destined to the NAT IP. Yeah, I'd have to look at my rules to see, but it looks like you're missing one of your PF rules there that actually feeds packets coming back into NAT, so that they can. But that maybe is only required when you're doing port forwarding. I'm not sure. But the question's up here and linked in the show doc if anybody else knows what to do.
Yes, please get in touch with us. We can try to answer his question. Okay. Well, next up we have is Steve. He's asking about mysterious lockups. He says, hey guys, I hope you can help me diagnose the following issue. He said, I have a FreeBSD 10 AMD 64 box with 8 gigabytes of RAM and a 4-disk RAID Z1 config. He said it's used throughout the day as a backup target for a myriad other machines. That's its only responsibility. He said irregularly, let's say once a month, the load will begin to escalate from 1 or 2 all the way up to 50 or 80 after a few hours. Then it refuses to respond to the point that I cannot log in and get a shell, although the CMP ping does come back. Last time I was forced a power cycle and jumped into the log files immediately after, but there was nothing interesting in dmessage.yesterday or messages. So he asks if we have any idea what the problem may be. It's hard to say without log data.
So when you've seen the load average go up, is the number of processes going up? Are you like, if you can run top and try to see what it looks like when things are going bad, when the load average is getting up there like that, you might be able to see what's happening. In particular, running top with the -S flag will make it show the system processes as well. That way, because if it's one of those, everything in top will look fine except the numbers at the top will go. But yeah, it sounds like with the load average getting up into the 50s and 80s, it sounds like swapping to death to me. Like something's trying to use more than the 8 gigs of RAM, and eventually you just everything slows to a crawl because it's constantly swapping stuff out in order to make room, and then something's happening, so it's swapping something else back in, which causes it to swap something else out, but then it needs that again, so it swaps it back in and then swaps it out, and that just...
So has he tuned his ZFS? So I've set my KMM and my limits and stuff and loaded it up.
Well, yeah, in particular, what I'd recommend for him is setting his arcmax lower, because the default is 95% of all of your RAM, and setting it something more like 5 or 6 gigs when you only have 8 gigs, or even less if you're using a lot of the RAM for other stuff. That'll probably save that from happening.
Definitely. But yeah, if you can at least try and find the culprit, that would be helpful as well.
Or
so top output would be
if you're monitoring it externally, monitor how much swap is being used. And if that starts going up, then that's something is eating all the RAM. whether it's ZFS or something else in ZFS fighting over the RAM or whatever. But you might want to try lowering the maximum amount of RAM that ZFS will use from the default to something a little more conservative, so that you don't run out of RAM.
Sure.
Jet,
Okay,
when he mentions the load average getting to 80, that technically means there are 80 processes which are all trying to use 100% of a CPU, which seems like there shouldn't be that many processes. So something is run amok.
Definitely. I don't know if he's got any monthly scripts running or something that are going through and
yes,
like the locate scripts.
There's the find script that does a find on slash, or it does a find on every file system looking for like files that have the set UID or set GID bits set as part of the security report, and having that crawl through your entire ZFS volume when it contains 100 million files can really slow things down. That's
bad news.
So you can disable that in etc/periodic.conf to disable that find. On one of mine, I have a small SSD. It's only like 120 gigs or whatever, but it literally contains like 120 million small files. And find was trying to go over that and was just making a mess of things. Just eating up all the I/O, trying to crawl through all those little files and check each one. But that's what I would look at, is try to figure out which task it is that's causing that, and check your swap.
Cool. Okay, well, as we wrap up here, thank you, by the way, Steve, for sending that in, and let us know if you figure out what it is. So, of course, we want to mention all our tutorials we posted in their entirety at bsdnow.tv. So take a look. If there's something older that we've done, you can still refer to that, and it'll be very helpful. Send your questions, comments, show ideas, topics, or stories you want mentioned on the show to feedback@bsdnow.tv. We'd love to hear from you. TJ, our producer, will probably reply first, so make sure you include him in the address of that. Last week, we mentioned that Ken was looking to help port Lumina to the other BSDs, and guess what? It's done now. He's got it. It looks like some folks have ported it over to OpenBSD and Dragonfly, so the only thing we need is net at this point. But Antoine sent a screenshot of it running on OpenBSD, which we'll have a link to in the show notes. So that was fast. Thank you, guys. Very cool. But we're also going to be at EuroBSDCon next week. So we'll have a pre-recorded episode next week. And we'll look forward to seeing you if you're able to get out there. And if not, the following week, we will be back, of course, with stories about EuroBSDCon. And hopefully a whole
it'll be almost like you were there.
Right? Yeah, we will fill you in. So,
normally you can watch, when we're not in Europe, you can watch live on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, which is 1800 UTC. I'm not sure, but I imagine around that time next week, the episode that'll come out will be airing on the live stream, and the show will probably come out early that week. It'll actually probably be out on the Wednesday, although I can't promise that. But you can definitely look out for it and check out. So even though we're not going to be here next week's episode is going to be really good.
Cool. So hopefully the presentations from Euro will also be recorded and uploaded this year.
Yeah. Well, last year they were recorded. So I don't know whatever happened with that.
It disappeared.
I will nag some people while we're at EuroBSDCon.
We'll find out.
That one will be like the worst one, because I remember AsiaBSDCon finally got their videos out like 6 weeks before the next AsiaBSDCon, but they're already past that point for Euro, so I don't know what's going on.
Yep. So if you're going to be there, come on by and say hi, or if you have something cool to talk about, please
we want to interview
everyone.
We need as many interviews as possible. So
we do. So we'll look forward to that, and hopefully it'll be a non-eventful flight and some good food. I'm hoping. I don't even know what we eat in Bulgaria, but it should be interesting.
But I got a fistful of 11. I'm going to find out.
That's right. Well, cool. Well, thank you guys for being with us this week, and we'll be back in a couple weeks live.